With Patrick Stewart making his return as Jean-Luc Picard in a brand new series for CBS All Access, we figured it was time to engage in some essential viewing to get up to warp speed on The Good Captain. And yes, we can drop Star Trek puns all day. Here are 10 essential Picard stories to check out before his new show debuts. The early days of Star Trek The Next Generation were kind of tough going, but this Season 2 episode was the exception. The Measure of a Man involves a fundamental question about the android Data. Is an artificial being, no matter how sophisticated, truly alive? Is he the property of Starfleet or an independent, conscious being? In true Star Trek fashion, it all comes down to a trial where Data's best friends have to double as legal counsel, with Riker on prosecution and Picard acting as Data's defense. And it's here that Picard, perhaps for the first time on the show, fully establishes his commanding presence and devotion to the very ideals of Starfleet. Of course, it's all done with Patrick Stewart's acting chops that we've come to expect.
Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits.
Spoilers, Picard won the debate, but it looks like the issue could be coming back to haunt him again in the new show. The first time Picard ran into the Borg, it was because the godlike trickster alien Q wanted to teach him a lesson. In a weird way, Q sought humility from Picard, who projected perhaps a little too much confidence for Q's taste. And he got it. As the captain quickly came to realize that even the mighty Enterprise was no match for the half-machine groupthink monsters the Borg, Picard has to admit to Q, in front of his crew no less, that he needs Q's help. Yes, even Captain Picard has his limits, and complacency can be a horrendous sin.
I understand what you've done here, Q. But I think the lesson could have been learned without the loss of 18 members of my crew.
This one is a Data episode rather than a Picard story, but it hits on an element that we think will be a big part of the new show. As with The Measure of a Man, the question of artificial intelligence and its future in the Star Trek universe came to the forefront here when Data created an android who he considered to be his daughter. Her name was Lal, and yes, she made out with Riker once.
Lal! Put him down.
The Offspring can be a lot of fun, but it's ultimately a sad, uplifting tale about parenthood and the joys, fears, and danger that most important job entails. It looks like the Borg will be a big part of the Picard show, so this two-parter is also required viewing. Often cited as the best episode of The Next Generation, The Best of Both Worlds saw the return of those cyborg boogeymen. And not just that, but the Borg reveal a new tactic.
We were unable to retrieve him, sir. The captain has been altered by the Borg.
He is a Borg.
Now known as Locutus, Picard's used as a weapon against the Federation itself. And while sure, Jean-Luc would get better eventually, and out of his Borg underwear too, fortunately, the trauma on and ramifications for the character would be long-standing. There are no Borg in this classic episode, but as the episode that immediately followed The Best of Both Worlds, it was a chance for both Picard and the audience to re-establish Picard's humanity. It's also the first time we saw the Picard vineyard back on Earth, as the captain returns home to visit his brother and try to heal. As if that's easy. The visit not only allowed us to see Picard as something beyond just captain of the Enterprise, we also get a taste of what Picard's life could have been like had he not become a Starfleet officer, and perhaps what it will be like when we meet him again in the new show. Plus, Patrick Stewart just acts the hell out of this one.
You don't know, Robert. You don't know.
Did you know that Picard's brain is decades older than the rest of him? In this all-timer, Jean-Luc encounters a probe that zaps him into a new life as a faraway man named Kamen on some unknown planet. As Kamen, Picard lives an entire life, fathering children, gaining grandchildren, and growing old with a beloved wife. But when he returns to the Enterprise, only mere minutes have passed. Picard's longing for domesticity is on full display in the inner light, and we see as he ages that he becomes, perhaps for the first time in his life, truly content. It's an incredibly moving episode, and one can't help but wonder how the experience might inform the older Picard we're going to be joining in the new show. Plus, we also got Picard's flute out of this one. When Picard gets the chance to correct the mistakes of his youth, he's thinking it must be Captain Picard Day.
Captain Picard Day?
I'm
I'm a role model.
But it turns out going back in time and reliving the day you got stabbed in the heart isn't as easy as you'd think. What, you didn't know Jean-Luc had an artificial heart? By avoiding the fight that led to that stabbing, Picard learns that maybe the young hot-headed cadet he once was key to making him the man he is today. Jean-Luc learns the hard way that our bad decisions form us just as much as our good ones. Our mistakes are ours to make.
I would rather die as the man I was than live the life I just saw.
And since it seems like Picard is going rogue in the new show, outside the Starfleet system, this might just be a lesson he hasn't forgotten. From the past, we now go to the future, or a possible future anyway. In the final episode of The Next Generation, an elderly Jean-Luc has returned to the family vineyard, having left Starfleet behind. This is more or less where we'll catch up with him when Star Trek Picard begins. Of course, how many of the elements of all good things will actually come to pass on the new show? Probably not much, but this series finale is essential viewing because of the way it resolves the relationship between Picard and Q, and also how it evolves his friendship with his crew. In seeing his future, Picard learns that he has an opportunity to live with more gusto. When that final scene comes on and Jean-Luc finally sits down for a card game with his crew, well, I'm not crying, you're crying. Stop crying, you're making me cry. This is actually an episode of Star Trek Voyager, but since Jerry Ryan's 7 of 9 will be showing up in Picard, probably best to get up to speed on what her deal is. When Captain Janeway and the Borg find themselves up against a threat neither can handle on their own, Janeway cuts a temporary truce with the cyborg baddies, and part of that deal involves the Borg 7 of 9 coming on board Voyager. By the end of the story, 7, as she would come to be known, was cut off from the Borg hive mind and stranded with the humans. She would come to take on a more human form, and over the course of the next 4 seasons, slowly attempt to assimilate back into humanity. This is where her story all started, so check it out.
It would be efficient.
The fourth and final Next Generation film is also the worst of the bunch, but it is the last time we saw Picard on screen, and it has its memorable aspects anyway, including a young Tom Hardy in a weird turn as a young clone of Picard. But anyway, it's the sacrifice that Data makes in this film that will likely be integral to the Picard show, as we see in the trailers that the captain seems to be dreaming about his lost friend. The pair's relationship is cemented in this film when Data saves Picard, finally repaying the favor after the measure of a man. Oh, and Riker and Troy get married in this one, and we know we'll be seeing them again too. Love those guys. For more on Picard, check out our trailer breakdown and our reaction to the footage from New York Comic Con. And be sure to subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch.